Well, hello all and welcome, and this is going to be an actual comic book review of sorts. This is the first one of these I've ever done, and I'm taking on a pretty big one by doing this, so don't judge me too harshly. But I did want to talk about, as if you've watched my other two videos on comics, you're pretty much aware I'm a pretty big Alan Moore fan. And I want to talk about kind of what is considered Alan Moore's lost masterpiece. Is it really a lost masterpiece? I don't know, because no one has read it, or no one has. A lot of newer fans have not been able to read it. A lot of people who have wanted to read it have not been able to read it, and that is Miracleman, which has been lost basically in legal hell for over 10 years. Um, and it's this story that continually, it's this comic that everyone wants to read, and everyone um, talks about as this great and wondrous thing. I will tell you, I don't think it's like the greatest thing ever. It is one of my favorite uh, books, and it's unfortunate that it has not been finished. And I hope Neil Gaiman at some point, because he's the guy that eventually, if there's going to be finished, it would be him, and we'll get to that eventually. But I did want to kind of review this and talk about it because it is a book that I enjoy a lot, and and there's reasons why I enjoy it. But to basically do that, we have to talk about kind of the first arc, and I'm not going to talk about the entire series in one video. I'm basically going to talk about issues 1 through 9, most of which were that if you have any of these, or if you've seen any of these, mainly what you're going to see is the Eclipse comics, which were basically reprints from the UK Warrior comics, and before eventually got to more original stuff released in the US. But if you don't know the story of Miracleman, let me explain what Miracleman is. Miracleman originally was Marvel Man, and Marvel Man was a product of Captain Marvel, i.e., DC's Captain Marvel. And when DC bought the rights to Captain Marvel, um, the they basically stopped using Captain Marvel, and the UK publisher of Captain Marvel needed a hero. And so he basically took kind of the mythos, kind of the idea of a guy who could say a magic word and turn into a superhero. And so Marvel Man was born. And he had two sidekicks, Kid Marvel Man and Young Marvel Man. And it went on for a while, and then eventually it went away. And then Alan Moore decided that he wanted to kind of bring it back, and he wanted to bring it back in a way, basically where the lead character, Mike Moran, who was Miracle Man, had basically kind of forgotten that he was Miracle Man, and now was in his 40s, and kind of that type of story. So it's in some ways it's a very different type of story. And when it got released in the United States, and it was called Marvel Man still, it got changed to Miracle Man because Marvel wasn't too happy about a character named Marvel Man. So there we have Miracle Man. It was eventually released in the United States by Eclipse Comics, and when Alan Moore was writing it, he wrote it for Warrior Comics, in an anthology book. So the first, I think it's the first 6 issues, or I think it's first 8, are all done. Where they're like 6-page stories, and then when they were re-released, they were re-released, as one story. So there you go there. So I'm going to talk about the first 9 issues because to me that's kind of the first complete arc. So so this won't be an in-depth review. This will be more of just me talking about the story. And for those people who've always kind of wondered what this is about, I'm going to kind of do my best to explain it and kind of what I've thought about it. I will say this is like the first act. In a lot of ways, if you're familiar with Babylon 5, this is very much, I would say, like the first issue, the first season of Babylon 5. Probably the worst um, episode, or the first season, or the worst season of Babylon 5. But everything is built upon this, so it's important in that way. Also, this story was written, um, there was written years apart. You basically get to see Alan Moore progress as a writer. The stuff is very, very wordy. And then by the time, by the time his run on this book is done, you're pretty much into the Alan Moore that most people kind of know. So there's a lot of that. But so I wouldn't say this is like the greatest. These first 9 issues, though issue 9 is pretty stellar. I will say I am a fan of issue 9. But you do see a progression. It is an interesting story, and it does build upon everything that comes after it. And I think starting probably issue 10, 10 or 11 is really where this, to me, winds up being just a stellar series. So basically where we start is your lead character, Mike Moran, is this guy who's in his 40s, is a kind of reporter, though is kind of an at-large reporter, and basically, you know, is doing one job at a time, trying to fend for his family, so to speak, him and his wife. And as the story starts, he's waking up and gets in a fight with his wife over money, because, you know, that's what couples do. And he's going off to cover a nuclear, I think it's a nuclear power plant opening, if I remember correctly. I can never remember exactly what type of plant it is. And so that's where he's going. And you learn that he continually has these dreams, and the dreams are of Miracleman, young Miracleman and kid Miracleman, and basically them all dying, basically. And he doesn't really understand what the dreams are. He doesn't get what the dreams are, and you know, and these dreams give him really, really bad headaches. So he's really feeling bad for himself. He goes on this assignment, and while he's on the assignment, he basically gets kidnapped or held hostage by these guys that are going to steal some plutonium. And while they're there, he basically has a seizure, magically remembers his magic word, which is atomic backwards, and spelt with a K, and he turns into Miracleman, saves the day, defeats the villains, burns the villains, and is caught on tape, and everyone's like, oh, wow, there's a superhero. Imagine that. He flies back home. His wife is freaking out because she doesn't know who he is. He eventually convinces her that he is her husband, just in a different form. Explains to her his version of his origin, which is very much like Captain Marvel's, and which she kind of laughs at and thinks is corny, and this, that, and the other, and you know, and he keeps reminding her that it was the 50s and it was a little cornier, and this, that, and the other. And from there, we get kind of the first major story arc, where we find out that Kid Miracleman is still actually alive. That he was not killed in what we find out is an explosion. They were sent on this mission, and while they were sent on this mission, they were basically almost destroyed by an A-bomb. Not sure exactly why someone tried to kill them with an A-bomb, but they were. Young Miracleman basically got destroyed, and we find out later that that Kid Miracleman is still very much alive. And so we have a little reunion, and then eventually, though, we find out that Kid Miracleman is not necessarily all that friendly, and in fact has turned evil. He basically never had to grow up. He's still very selfish. He's very impulsive. He does the things that he wants to do, and him and Miracleman had a pretty huge battle, and which eventually Miracleman wins. And when he wins, Kid Miracleman reverts back to his actual human self. And when he does, he hasn't reverted back to his human self in since he was almost killed, and so he's still a kid. And so Miracleman thinks, okay, I've got to kill this kid because this thing that's inside him is insane, and and we cannot let it out. Basically, he is convinced that Kid Miracleman is no more, and basically what Kid Miracleman turns out to be is Black Adam, if you're aware of the Captain Marvel from DC stuff. We're then introduced with Mr. Cream, who is a guy who the government sends after Miracleman. He is in search of Miracleman, and then there's a pretty good issue where Miracleman's powers are kind of explained, and we get a hint of what his real powers are through this. And then at the end of that, we find out that Mike's wife is actually pregnant with Miracleman's baby, not actual Mike's baby. And so that starts a whole different sort of storyline where, Mike is, kind of, uneasy because he's basically these two different people, and his wife is now pregnant with basically another man's baby, but it's really his, and it's very kind of complicated. And the whole time this Mr. Cream is coming after him, and we think Mr. Cream is there to basically kill him, but Mr. Cream winds up actually helping him, and we actually get his true origin. And we find out his true origin was that he was an orphaned Air Force child, and him and the other two, and that they were basically kidnapped and were used for these scientific experiments. We also get introduced by Big Ben, which is like the first other kind of superhero we're introduced to. We kind of get an understanding that Miracleman was actually all of the adventures that he remembers, for the most part, were all dreams, really, and they didn't really happen. They were just kind of implanted in his head. And so we kind of start getting the origin of him. All of this kind of takes place. That he escapes the government, goes back home, only to find that his wife has now been taken by the very doctor who helped create him. We get more of the origin and that fact that they found a UFO. They figured out in the UFO that the alien basically tried to change forms. They used that technology to create Miracleman and his two partners. And this all kind of goes through, and at the end of this, he ends up killing the evil doctor, as you would expect, saving the day. Mr. Cream gets killed, and we get Miracle Dog. We get the first appearance of Miracle Dog, which is kind of funny, which is this little puppy that turns into this big giant dog. And at the end of this, we finally get and the whole reason why his wife was kidnapped is because she's pregnant, and she's pregnant with Miracleman's baby. And even she's kind of concerned of exactly what this baby's going to be. It's going to have superpowers, it's going to be normal, what is it going to be? We get kind of hints of maybe what it's going to be, and then at the end of issue 9, which is kind of the birth issue, which not kind of, it's the birth issue, and literally what they did is they took drawings from a manual and of what sketches of what a birth actually looks like. It's very, very, very depictive. And at the very end of this, we get a little bit of a cliffhanger ending, which then leads to the next kind of story arc. Again, this really just kind of sets the stage for everything that comes after. It's very interesting stuff. There's a lot of interesting things in it. I wouldn't say it's a must-read, other than I think that there is stuff later that is a must-read, and so to kind of get that, this is kind of a must-read. It is unfortunate that this stuff isn't available anymore, but if you know where to look, you can find it. And I do think it's something that people should check out, because you do get to see like the progression of Alan Moore's work. The art, for the most part, is pretty good. There's nothing I don't think is too horrible. The stuff that's bad. Issue 8, I will say that issue 8 is nothing more than reprints of the old 50s stuff, which they do kind of in a funny funny way how they reprint the stuff and why they reprint the stuff, and it is worth checking out for that. Overall, I do think it's a really good series, so check it out later.